Welcome to the debate. So, in naval architecture, a watertight bulkhead is essentially this rigid wall inside a ship's hull.
Right, to stop the flooding.
Exactly. If one compartment floods, you seal the door. The water stays contained, the ship stays afloat, and the damage doesn't, bleed into the rest of the vessel. It is a brilliant binary containment strategy.
In theory, anyway.
In theory, yes. But today we are asking, what happens when you try to apply that kind of rigid structural containment to human beings, specifically human beings navigating the modern labor market?
Which is anything but rigid or contained.
Very true. We are looking at the LPR Academy's Module 9, and specifically the incredibly strict boundaries it establishes around the CLPRA credential. That's the Certified Living Professional Record Advisor.
And the core question here is whether that strict wall between, what do they call it, LPR method competence and general career expertise is actually a necessary protective mechanism.
Or conversely, just an artificial administrative fiction.
Right. So I will be arguing that this strict definitional boundary is the essential firewall. It protects both the integrity of the method and, crucially, the client's dignity.
And I'm taking the stance that the method inherently bleeds into career strategy, making this mandated linguistic separation more about, institutional liability than practical reality.
It's the defining tension of this entire methodology, really. So let's just jump right into how the Academy defines this boundary, because the source material is completely uncompromising here.
Oh, it's very aggressive about the definitions. Extremely. It states clearly that CLPRA certification means competence in the living professional record method, period. It does not mean universal career expertise.
Right. They really want to hammer that home.
They do. It does not mean job placement authority. It goes out of its way to specify that it does not mean legal, financial, therapeutic, immigration, HR, recruiting, or get this, AI audit authority.
Which is quite the laundry list of things you are not allowed to be.
It is. Now, it does acknowledge that a CLPRA certified person may offer independent services separately, like resume writing or interview coaching.
But there's a catch, right?
A massive catch. They must explicitly distinguish those independent services from what CLPRA certification actually certifies. The credential is very specific. The language must be precise.
Which sounds great on paper.
I think it's more than just on paper. I see this strict restraint as the true source of an advisor's power. By refusing to drift into generic career coaching, the advisor anchors their work entirely in verifiable evidence.
Okay, but I look at this from a completely different angle. And just to be clear, I completely agree that an advisor shouldn't be giving unauthorized legal advice on a severance package or trying to act as a therapist.
Good, so we agree on the extremes.
Yes, the extremes. But I think separating LPR method competence from quote-unquote career expertise is an illusion. It is a watertight bulkhead made of paper.
Made of paper? That's a bit harsh, don't you think?
Not if you look closely at the curriculum, because it actually demands that an advisor perform what it calls market translation. It literally tells them to help a client test market lanes and to diagnose before optimizing.
Yes, but diagnosing the evidence layer isn't the same as dictating career destiny.
But I just don't see how you can perform a market translation of someone's professional evidence without fundamentally engaging in career strategy. Forcing advisors to linguistically compartmentalize these overlapping skill sets, it creates a highly fragmented, confusing experience for the client.
Confusing? I would argue it clarifies the engagement.
Not for the client sitting in that chair. They don't care about the Academy's internal credentialing distinctions. They are just trying to survive a broken labor market. So enforcing this hyper-specific boundary feels like a way to legally insulate the institution rather than, reflecting the messy reality of advising a human being.
Okay, I see the logic there, but I think it breaks down when you consider what happens without those boundaries. The insistence on this separation isn't just about institutional protection. It is about preventing the advisor from drifting from evidence into hype.
Ah, the famous anti-drift rules.
Exactly. The material specifically highlights these rules. For instance, you cannot drift from what they call source into surface or from rendering into invention.
Let's break that down for a second, actually, because those terms can sound a bit overly academic to a lot of people.
Absolutely, yeah. So source is the verifiable history. It's the actual things the client did and the cryptographic or verified proof that backs it up.
And surface is basically just the resume or the LinkedIn profile, right?
Right, the output. Now, rendering means simply formatting that actual history so it can be read by an employer. Invention, on the other hand, is when a career coach decides to, well, make up a personal brand for you that doesn't actually exist in your history.
Which happens all the time in the industry.
All the time. So the rules state that a CLPRA certified person cannot call themselves an official job placement partner or claim they are certified to beat the ATS algorithms. If they do that, they have abandoned the method entirely. They've drifted into invention.
And I totally agree that promising to beat the ATS is a false guarantee. Nobody can promise they will beat an automated tracking system. It's just a predatory sales tactic.
Exactly. Which is why the boundary matters so much. Think of the CLPRA advisor as a forensic accountant, whereas a traditional career coach is more like a wealth manager.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right? The forensic accountant's job is strictly to ensure that the ledger is absolutely true, that the evidence exists, and that the structural architecture of your claims is sound. They do not tell you what stocks to buy.
Sure, they don't guarantee you'll get rich.
They just govern the source data. Now, the forensic accountant and the wealth manager might be the exact same human being operating out of the same office, but they are wearing two distinctly different hats.
Governed by different credentials.
Yes, governed by entirely different credentials and ethical frameworks. The language must be precise because the moment the forensic accountant uses their auditing credential to guarantee a stock tip, the integrity of the entire audit is destroyed.
Look, it is a great analogy. It's very clean. But I don't buy that it actually works in this context.
Why not? The separation of duties is clear.
Let me tell you why. Your forensic accountant is looking at historical static numbers, but the LPR material explicitly instructs the advisor to look at forward-facing viability. Take the exact scenario provided in Module 9.
You mean the client who just wants a job?
Yes. A client walks into your office and says, I do not care about a record, I just need a job.
Right, and the curriculum explicitly says it's a failure for the advisor to respond with, the LPR will get you hired. That's a textbook violation.
Yes, but look at the approved LPR-aligned response. The curriculum instructs the advisor to tell the client they can help clarify what roles are, quote, more readable, and what surfaces we can render responsibly.
Which is a highly governed, methodical response.
Which roles are more readable in the current job market based on their evidence is not forensic accounting. It is wealth management. It is career strategy.
I completely disagree. It's translation.
You are directly advising them on where their professional assets will yield the best return in the market. So the module tries incredibly hard to enforce this boundary, saying, we only do method, not career destiny. But the very mechanics of the method require the advisor to evaluate market channels and positioning hypotheses.
But
the boundary is instantly blurred by the work itself.
I get why you're saying that, but let me push back on the mechanics there. Identifying what roles are readable based on existing evidence is still an act of translation. It is not an act of direction.
It feels like a distinction without a difference to the client.
There is a massive difference. It is saying, based on the claims we have mapped, in the verifiable evidence we have captured, this specific market lane will understand your signal, and this other market lane will not. That is orientation before optimization.
Okay, but you're still orienting them toward a specific market outcome.
No, it is an objective assessment of whether their claims are mature enough for a target lane. It still leaves the agency entirely with the client. The advisor is not saying you should pivot to being a project manager.
They're just strongly suggesting it based on the data.
They are saying, if you want to target project management, here's where your evidence is strong, and here is your proof gap where you lack verifiable history. That is method. That is not destiny.
But the moment you start identifying proof gaps for specific market lanes, the client is relying on your career expertise to know what that specific market lane requires in the first place. I mean, if we agree that helping a client read the market is inherently career strategy, then the Academy's rule about separating independent services completely falls apart.
I don't see how it falls apart at all.
Let's look at how they handle that later in the module. We are told over and over that a CLPRA certified person may offer independent services, like resume writing or interview prep.
Right.
But they must explicitly say, this is an independent service I offer separate from CLPR.
Yes, exactly. That is the firewall. It prevents the advisor's independent business claims from diluting the specific meaning of the certification.
Okay, but then look at the future advisor tiering outlined in the exact same module. The text explicitly plans for advanced levels of certification. You have Tier 3, which is a market translation advisor, and Tier 4, the Advanced Application Support Advisor. Tier 4 is described mechanically as an advisor who can support job-specific renderings, promotion packets, and advanced client-specific professional services.
Which represents advanced mastery of the method.
It is intellectually inconsistent for the Academy to claim that CLPRA doesn't certify resume writing or career application expertise while simultaneously architecting advanced certification tiers that literally audit and support job-specific application materials.
What?
How can you maintain the watertight bulkhead when the Academy itself is planning to certify the waters on the other side?
Look, I'll admit when I first read the section on Tier 4, I had the exact same thought. It does look almost identical to high-end career coaching on the surface.
Because it is.
No, it's not. If you're wondering how a Tier 4 advisor is any different from a resume writer, you have to look at the mechanism of how they operate. A traditional resume writer invents the narrative. They take your work history and they spin it, often completely untethered from hard proof.
Sure, the bad ones do.
Even the good ones drift into invention. A Tier 4 Advanced Application Support Advisor is not just writing a promotion packet. They are applying what the material calls source-to-surface governance.
Meaning they are just checking the facts?
It is much deeper than fact-checking. They are asking, what is this specific bullet point claiming, and what does the record actually support? They trace every single claim on that promotion packet back to a cryptographically secure or verified piece of evidence in the source layer.
I understand the forensic part of it.
They are applying advanced claim maturity work and privacy labeling to a highly specific, high-stakes surface. But the fundamental rule remains exactly the same. The rendering is strictly accountable to the record.
Right.
They still aren't promising the client will get the promotion. They aren't drifting into invention. The tiering represents a deepening of method competence, not an abandonment of the boundary.
Mechanically, I understand the distinction. It's a very elegant theoretical framework, but I ask you to picture the actual reality of the transaction in the room.
The reality is exactly why the rules exist.
Just humor me. The client is sitting there, paying an advisor to help them build a Tier 4 promotion packet. Do you truly believe the client makes a meaningful distinction between advanced source-to-surface governance and expert career support?
If the advisor communicates properly, yes.
Come on. To the client, they are buying career expertise, and the advisor is selling it, even if they are forced to use sanitized, highly precise LPR terminology to describe it.
But that precise terminology is exactly what protects the client from the systemic failures of the labor market. And this brings us to what I consider the absolute core of the source material.
The dignity doctrine?
Yes. It is the most profound philosophical doctrine in the entire module. Dignity before the record and the absolute prohibition on employment guarantees.
It is a striking piece of doctrine. I will definitely give you that.
It is revolutionary in this space. The curriculum explicitly demands that advisors must not promise jobs. They must not promise interviews, offers, recruiter responses, or ATS success.
Right, because they can't control it.
Exactly, because the LPR process can improve clarity, trust, and privacy, but it absolutely cannot control the labor market. A client can build a perfectly governed, beautifully evidence-backed record and still get rejected because of bad timing, age bias, geographic limits, or simply because the automated filtering system is completely broken.
Which it often is.
Right. So the doctrine states human dignity comes before the record. The record serves the worker. The worker does not serve the record. If an advisor blurs the line, if they start promising outcomes or guaranteeing that their career expertise will get the client hired, they are implicitly telling the client that their human worth is tied to their employability.
The text says, Proof is not dignity. That is the phrase they use, and it is a beautiful sentiment.
It is more than a sentiment, though. It is a hard practice boundary. If we don't draw a line that says, I am only certifying your evidence, not your employability, don't we risk making the LPR just another surveillance tool?
That's a bit extreme.
Is it? Don't we risk turning it into an employability score that absolutely crushes the client when a broken market inevitably rejects them? The restraint is part of the service.
Look, I hear that, and I acknowledge the deep ethical value of refusing to equate evidence with human worth. But let's ground this in a real-world scenario. The module talks about clients coming in with what it calls silence fatigue or transition shock.
Very common right now.
Right. Picture the room. The client is sitting across from you. They've been unemployed for 8 months. They have sent 200 applications into the void and heard absolutely nothing.
It's brutal.
They are terrified. They are desperate. And they are paying you money to look them in the eye and say, I am not here to get you a job. I only govern your evidence. Feels incredibly cold in that room. It feels completely detached from the human reality of that transaction.
It might sound cold initially, but I argue it is actually the most compassionate thing an advisor can do.
Compassionate? To refuse to help them win?
Because if you say, I will get you hired, and then the market rejects them anyway, you have just told them that their evidence, their professional truth, is the reason they failed. By separating the method from the market, you preserve their dignity.
But look at who that separation really protects. Let's look at the structural realities outlined in the module. We have a certification, the CLPRA, that costs a separate $1,000 fee on top of academy completion.
Standard professional credentialing costs.
Sure, but the document makes a very sharp, almost legally defensive point of stating that completing the CLPRA certification does not automatically grant you access to the JP-CLPR platform.
For those unfamiliar, that's the actual software and job platform where client assignments happen.
Right. The material insists that certification does not grant employment, client assignments, or the authority to represent the brand.
Which maintains the integrity of the training pathway versus the operational software platform. Those are two very different things.
No, it maintains liability separation. When that distressed client comes in, they are paying for LPR method guidance to survive a system that explicitly asks for proof before opportunity. The advisor is instructed to be compassionate, sure, but to essentially diagnose the broken system without taking any ownership of the outcome.
Because they don't own the outcome, the market does.
I argue that sanitizing the language this rigorously doesn't actually change the client's expectation of a market advantage. It simply insulates the advisor, and more importantly, it insulates the LPR institution from the emotional fallout and systemic failures of the labor market.
Wow.
It's a highly sophisticated way of saying, we will take your money to optimize your evidence, but when the automated filtering system rejects you anyway, well, that is outside our scope.
I think that is an incredibly cynical reading of what is actually a deeply protective stance. You call it liability insulation, I call it intellectual honesty.
It can be both.
The material specifically instructs the advisor on how to handle the exact scenario you described, where a client says, the market is broken, nothing matters. The module points out that the weak, typical career coach response is toxic positivity. You know, stay positive, you just need confidence.
Which is unhelpful, yes.
It's worse than unhelpful, it's gaslighting. The LPR-aligned response is to acknowledge that parts of the system are indeed low feedback and overloaded, and to explicitly separate what can be improved, their evidence, their claims, their privacy boundaries, from the market forces that are completely outside their control.
But giving them that breakdown doesn't get them the job.
Giving someone orientation without false hope is not abandoning them. It is empowering them to govern the only part of the process they actually own, their source layer.
But is it truly empowering if we force them to compartmentalize their struggle? The human experience of job loss or career transition isn't neatly divided into source layer governance over here and emotional trauma over there.
No one is saying it is.
But the framework demands it. When an advisor is forced to constantly say, I am acting as a CLPRA right now, but this other thing I'm doing is an independent service, it creates massive cognitive dissonance. The client just wants someone to help them navigate the storm.
And the advisor is helping them.
By constantly checking the watertight bulkheads to make sure they aren't drifting, I worry that, in the pursuit of methodological purity, the Academy is asking advisors to perform an administrative fiction that prevents them from fully supporting the human being sitting right in front of them.
But consider the alternative, please. It is the exact lack of those bulkheads that has made the generic career coaching industry so fraught with empty promises and predatory hype.
I'm not defending predatory coaching.
But that's what happens when you blur the lines. When an advisor tells a client, you decide what your story is, and the advisor just invents a personal brand for them, they are drifting into invention. They are creating a surface without a source.
True.
The boundary we've been debating ensures that the advisor does not decide who the client is. They do not force a career direction. They do not force disclosure of an employment gap that the client desperately wants to keep private.
The privacy controls are excellent. I agree.
The restraint prevents the advisor from taking over. By clearly defining what CLPR certification is, LPR method competence, and explicitly stating what it is not, we ensure that the client remains the absolute owner of their professional truth.
I definitely don't disagree that generic coaching has a massive hype problem. And I deeply value the LPR's focus on verifiable evidence. But when I look at the module's rhythm of practice, orient, scope, capture, classify, map claims, apply privacy, it is a highly clinical, almost mechanical process.
It's rigorous.
And yet, the text itself admits that clients arrive with shame, anger, desperation, and immense financial pressure. The advisor is told not to let client urgency collapse the method, but urgency is the reality of the labor market.
That doesn't mean you abandon the method because the client is anxious.
The real tension here is that the LPR Academy is trying to impose a pristine, perfectly governed methodology onto a labor ecosystem that is fundamentally chaotic, biased, and often completely irrational. The boundaries are necessary for the curriculum to exist in theory, but out in the wild, those boundaries are going to leak.
They will be tested, certainly. No one is denying that, but that is exactly why the module emphasizes that advisor judgment is the ultimate competency.
Judgment is subjective, though.
But guided by strict principles. The final rule of the module is that the advisor protects the method by protecting the client's source layer. Sometimes that means exercising the judgment to pause, refer them out to a therapist, or decline the work entirely.
Turning away a desperate client.
If a client insists on exposing unsafe evidence or vehemently demands an outcome guarantee, the advisor must decline. That isn't a failure of the method. That is the method working exactly as intended. The bulkhead holds.
It holds, provided the advisor is willing to walk away from a paying client who just wants a traditional guarantee. And perhaps that is the ultimate real-world test of this credential.
It requires immense discipline, yes.
It requires a level of professional discipline that runs entirely counter to the standard financial incentives of the career services industry. You are asking advisors to sell restraint in a market that is screaming for guarantees.
Which actually brings us to a really fascinating point of convergence for us. We both agree that the LPR method's focus on source before surface represents a necessary, almost radical evolution in professional advising.
Oh, absolutely. The shift away from making up personal brands and moving toward governed, verifiable evidence is a massive step forward for the industry. The focus on preserving the integrity of the worker's history is vital.
Good. We have some common ground.
My contention just remains that the linguistic and operational walls built around it are somewhat porous, and they struggle to contain the holistic reality of a human being in transition.
And I maintain that without those strict linguistic and operational boundaries, the method loses its power, risks becoming hype, and ultimately fails to protect the client's dignity.
We'll have to see how it plays out in practice.
We will. Here is the ultimate takeaway from this module, I think. In a broken labor market, the hardest part of advising isn't optimizing the client's resume. It is the restraint required to not promise them a job. Navigating the tension between helping someone succeed in a deeply broken system while steadfastly refusing to take ownership of their truth is a delicate and ongoing balance.
It is a balance that every advisor will have to strike the very moment they sit across from someone who is relying on them.
More to explore in how these frameworks operate in practice, and I highly suggest examining the source material to decide for yourself where the line between method and market truly lies. We began today talking about the structural architecture built into great ships. Perhaps the question isn't whether the water will eventually test the walls, but whether the architecture of the credential is strong enough to keep both the advisor and the client afloat when the storm hits. Thank you for joining us.